The chess game remained unfinished. They left it on the table, a silent testament to the truce they now lived. The guests departed with embraces and well-wishes that felt, for once, untainted by strategy or fear. Sophia was the last to leave, squeezing them both with a fierce, tearful pride before her car vanished down the Pine Line Drive. The house was theirs again. The only sound was the eternal sigh of the ocean against the cliff. They did not speak of the future that night. They did not make plans. They simply existed in the new, official stillness. He built a fire. She poured 2 glasses of whiskey. They sat on the floor before the hearth, shoulders touching, watching the flames eat the wood. "I never asked you," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room, "what you wanted from any of this, beyond the truth." She swirled the amber liquid in her glass, considering. The question coming from him was monumental. "I think," she said slowly, "I wanted a problem I couldn't solve, a pattern I couldn't predict. You were that." He looked at her, firelight dancing in his eyes. "And now?" "Now," she said, meeting his gaze, "I have a partner to solve the unsolvable problems with. It's a better equation." He reached over, took her glass from her hand, and set both theirs on the stone hearth. Then he took her face gently between his hands. His thumbs traced the arches of her cheekbones, a touch of reverence, of stunned gratitude. "You rewired me, Evelyn," he whispered. "You took a system built on control and introduced a variable called us. And the system didn't break, it evolved." He kissed her then. It was not like the first almost kiss, charged with forbidden tension. It was not like the careful touches in dark offices. This was a seal, a confirmation. It was deep and slow and tasted of whiskey and the salt air drifting through the open window. It was the final, silent signature on the contract they had been drafting since the day she called his billion-dollar model incompetent. When they broke apart, foreheads resting together, he breathed, "What's the next move?" She smiled against his lips. "We have no more moves, we're off the board." He pulled back just enough to see her smile. A corresponding one, rare and true, broke over his own face. "Impossible," he murmured. "The game never ends. The board just gets bigger." He stood, pulling her up with him. Without another word, he led her from the living room, down the hall, past the room that had been hers, to the one that was now theirs. The months that followed were a study in seamless duality. In the city, they were Thorne and Reed Thorne, the empire's architects, a united front of terrifying competence. Their debates in boardrooms were legendary, a public intellectual dance that drove their company to heights even he hadn't dared project. But in Maine, they were just Alexander and Evelyn. He learned to split firewood, his initial clumsiness giving way to a grim, satisfied proficiency. She started a stubborn, wind-battered herb garden on the lay side of the house. They filled the shelves with books, his histories, her treatises on systems theory, dog-eared novels they read aloud to each other on stormy nights. One evening, as autumn painted the maples behind the house in fire, he found her in the library, staring not at a book, but at the original, simple key fob he'd given her, now hanging on a hook by the door. "Regrets?" he asked, leaning against the doorway. She shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "No, I was just thinking. You gave me the key to a vault and a house, but you never gave me a key to your penthouse in the city." He pushed off the door frame and walked to her. "You never needed one," he said, taking her hand. "You were already inside. You had been for a very long time." He lifted her hand, turned it over, and pressed his lips to her palm. The doors were just a formality. It was the most romantic thing he had ever said, and he'd said it like he was stating a quarterly earnings report. She laughed, the sound bright and free in the quiet room. He smiled, that private, real smile that was her greatest trophy. Later, as they lay in the dark, listening to the November wind howl around the eaves, he spoke into the darkness. I had a dream last night about a hostile takeover. She murmured, half asleep, no, about the Greenstone project, the original one, the one you killed, but on. He paused. In the dream, it didn't fail. It worked perfectly. We built it. It made money. And I stood there looking at it and I felt nothing, just a hollow, perfect success. He turned his head on the pillow to look at her shadowed profile. Then I woke up, and you were here, and the house was creaking, and the project was a different, better one, and I felt everything. She turned to face him, reaching out to find his hand in the dark. She laced her fingers through his. The truth isn't in the perfect success, Alexander. It's in the cracks, and what we choose to build in them. He brought their joined hands to his lips. We built this. Yes, she said, we did. And as the wind finally began to die down, giving way to the steady, rhythmic pulse of the sea, they slept, two former opponents, now co-authors of a piece they had once thought impossible, in the fortress they had built together, not against the world, but as a quiet, powerful place within it. The sun rose over the cliff house, painting the calm Atlantic in bands of rose and gold. The chessboard sat forgotten. The marriage proposal hung in the quiet air between them, not as a question awaiting an answer, but as a fact they had both already accepted. Alexander stood, his hand still loosely holding hers. We should tell Sophia. Evelyn nodded, and the board. The board, he said, a hint of his old, wry dryness returning, will issue a statement about stability and continuity of leadership. They'll see it as a corporate merger. Isn't it? He looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face. No, the merger happened a long time ago. This is just making it official to people who need things to be official. They drove back to the city that morning, the world outside the car looking the same, but feeling irrevocably altered. The secret sat between them, a warm, private weight. Sophia was in Evelyn's office at the foundation, up to her elbows in grant applications. She took one look at their faces as they walked in together and dropped her pen. Oh, thank God. Finally, do you have a date? Can I plan everything? Please say I can plan everything. Alexander let out a short, genuine laugh. It's been approximately 12 hours, Sophia. And I've been waiting 5 years. She flew around the desk and hugged Evelyn, then her brother, her eyes sparkling. He didn't mess it up. I'm so proud of him. The board, as predicted, received the news with a collective, relieved exhale. A private memo circulated, focusing on deepened alignment and long-term strategic cohesion. The press release was a masterpiece of bland corporate prose that said nothing and everything. They set a date for 3 months later, not in a cathedral, not in a tropical resort, at the house in Maine. The wedding was not an event. It was a logistical operation executed with the same precision they applied to a hostile takeover. Sophia was given strict parameters, 20 guests maximum. No media, no fanfare. The guest list was a ruthless edit. Sophia, a handful of trusted, long-term executives who had earned their loyalty, and the lead engineer from the Austin team, Mark, who now ran the most profitable division of Thorne Industries. Evelyn wore a dress the color of sea fog, simple and stark. Alexander wore a dark suit, no tie. They stood before the wall of glass, the officiant a retired judge who had once worked for Thorne's father. The vows were not poetic. They were direct, adapted from the partnership agreement they had already signed. Do you promise to challenge each other's assumptions? The judge asked. "I do," they said in unison. "Do you promise to protect the space you've built, both within your empire and outside of it?" "I do." "Do you promise to choose each other, freely, every day, knowing that the choice is the source of all power you share?" This time there was a pause. They looked at each other, and in that look was the memory of every collision, every silent standoff, every moment of trust earned in fire. "I do," Alexander said, his voice rough. "I do," Evelyn said, clear and sure. "Then, by the power vested in me, and more importantly, by the power you have vested in each other, I pronounce you partners in all things." It was done. The dinner was catered by a local chef, served on the deck under strings of light. Stories were told, mostly by Sophia. Laughter echoed over the rocks, a foreign, wonderful sound in that place. Mark made a surprisingly moving toast about integrity and second chances. As dusk fell and the guests drifted inside, Alexander and Evelyn slipped away, down the winding path to a rocky outcrop that overlooked the cove below. The last of the light glimmered on the water. He stood behind her, his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. They watched the sky darken. "It's quieter than I expected," he murmured into her hair. "The war's over." "Is it?" His arms tightened slightly. "There will always be another deal, another enemy, another crack in some foundation." She leaned back into his solid warmth. "Yes, but now we know the difference between the war and the weather." He was silent for a long time, just breathing with her, watching the first star appear. "What do we do now?" he asked, the master strategist momentarily without a plan. She turned in his arms to face him. In the deepening twilight, his features were soft, the lines of command relaxed. "We go back inside. We thank our guests. We send them home. And then," she said, lifting a hand to his cheek, "we finally finish that chess game." A slow smile spread across his face, the one that was only for her. It held contentment, a quiet victory, and the thrilling promise of a game that would never truly end. "Okay," he said, and hand in hand, they turned and walked back up the path to the lit house, to the life they had built, not on a foundation of stone, but on one of chosen, equal, and enduring truth. The months that followed were not a fairy tale. They were a careful, deliberate construction. The partnership papers were signed in his office, witnessed only by Claire and a stone-faced lawyer who had learned not to question Alexander's directives. The board was informed via a terse memo. The news sent a shockwave through the financial world, but the fortress of Thorne Industries, now co-owned by the woman known as his truth teller, was impervious to gossip. They did not move in together. Evelyn kept her apartment. He kept his sterile penthouse. The house in Maine remained empty, a silent promise on the horizon. Work was their common language, their proving ground. Sitting beside him at the board table, her voice held equal weight. He would argue with her, in front of everyone, over market strategy or risk assessment, his eyes alight with a fierce, proud challenge. She would hold her ground, her logic a scalpel to his instinct. The board watched, baffled and enthralled, as the empire's most critical decisions became a public, intellectual duel between its two most powerful minds. It was, in its way, their courtship. The first real test of the new balance came with the proposed acquisition of a German engineering firm. The data was compelling. Alexander was convinced. Evelyn was not. "Their innovation pipeline is stagnant," she said, late one night in his penthouse. They were on the floor, blueprints and financials spread around them like a tactical map. "They're living off one legacy patent. In 5 years, they'll be a millstone. Their brand alone is worth the premium," he countered, tapping the valuation sheet. It gives us instant credibility in the IU defense sector. Credibility we don't need, we have performance. We shouldn't buy a name, we should build our own. He sat back, studying her. You're letting your bias for organic growth cloud the strategic advantage of a swift entry. And you're letting your desire for a symbolic win override the long-term math. She met his gaze, unwavering. It's a bad deal, Alexander. Silence stretched between them, thick with the tension of two sovereign powers negotiating a border. Finally, he leaned forward and drew a large, decisive X over the firm's logo on the summary page. Then we don't do it. Just like that. No sulking, no power play. A decision made, she looked at the crossed-out logo. Just like that. You're my partner. If you see a crack I don't, we don't build on that foundation. He gathered the papers, his movements efficient. It's the first rule. What's the second rule? She asked, a faint smile touching her lips. He looked up and the intensity in his eyes softened just for her. We don't work past midnight on Fridays. He stood, extending a hand to pull her up. Starting now. The first time they went to Maine, it was not planned. It was a Wednesday in October. A deal in Tokyo had just collapsed through no fault of theirs, a sudden geopolitical tremor. Alexander had handled the loss with icy calm, but Evelyn saw the rigid set of his shoulders, the extra silence. She finished her own work, walked into his office, and placed a printed weather forecast on his desk. There's a storm coming, to the coast. They say the waves will be 30 feet. He looked at the paper, then at her, and the house on the cliff has no security system. It might be a good idea to go check on it. He held her gaze for a long moment, then he picked up his phone. Claire, cancel the rest of my week. They drove north in silence as the sky bruised to gray. The house appeared as the last light faded, a low, shingled structure of weathered gray, all angles and glass facing the turbulent Atlantic. It was not grand. It was stark, beautiful, and utterly alone. He carried their bags in. The interior was just as he'd said, empty, save for a vast leather sofa facing the wall of windows and shelves upon empty shelves waiting for books. The only sound was the distant, gathering roar of the sea. They stood together at the glass as the storm hit. The world dissolved into a fury of wind and water, the waves exploding against the rocks below in plumes of white violence. It was chaos, magnificence, raw power with no purpose other than to be. Alexander stood perfectly still, watching it. The lines of tension in his face, the armor he wore in the city, slowly began to dissolve, washed clean by the spectacle of a force even he couldn't control. Evelyn didn't speak. She simply moved to stand beside him, her shoulder almost touching his. After an hour, as the storm's peak passed, he let out a breath she didn't know he'd been holding. It's louder than I thought it would be. It's the truth, she said. Not a spreadsheet, just water and air and consequence. He turned his head to look at her. In the reflection of the storm-lit glass, his eyes were quiet. I don't know what to do here, he admitted, the words barely audible over the wind. Nothing, she said. That's the point. They ordered pizza from the one place in the nearest town that delivered. They ate on the floor. They found a deck of cards in a kitchen drawer and played a game she didn't know the rules for, making them up as they went. He laughed, a real, unguarded sound she'd heard only a handful of times. It was swallowed by the boom of the surf. Later, they sat on the sofa in the dark, a single blanket shared over their legs, watching the aftermath of the storm churn under a sliver of moon. The Tokyo deal, he said into the comfortable darkness. It wasn't your fault. I know that's not what I mean. He paused. A year ago, a loss like that would have felt like a crack in the foundation. Tonight, sitting here, it just feels like the weather. Unpleasant. Temporary. She rested her head against his shoulder. Maybe that's the third rule. What is? Knowing the difference between a crack in the foundation and the weather. He was silent for a long time, his arm coming to rest around her. I'm learning, he said finally, and he was. The empire did not crumble. It grew stronger, more resilient under their joint stewardship. They were written about in hushed, reverent tones, the billionaire and his partner, the strategist who had become his equal. The house in Maine slowly filled, not with things, but with evidence of a shared life. Her books appeared on the shelves. His collection of sea glass gathered in a bowl on the windowsill. A chessboard sat permanently on the low table, a game always in progress. One evening, 5 years to the day after she first walked into his boardroom, they were there. The windows were open to a calm summer night, the scent of salt and pine in the air. The chess game was a stalemate. They had abandoned it. He was reading. She was watching the last light bleed from the sky. Evelyn, he said, closing his book. She looked over. He didn't have a velvet box. He didn't have a contract. He simply looked at her, the man who had once owned everything and now shared it all. Marry me, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of the next, logical, beautiful phase in a long-term strategy. A merger of souls, already complete on every ledger that mattered. She looked at him, at the quiet certainty in his eyes, at the empty, beloved house around them, at the vast, untamable ocean beyond the glass. Yes, she said. He smiled, a slow, deep thing that transformed his whole face. He reached for her hand, his thumb stroking over her knuckles, a gesture now familiar, cherished. Okay, he said, and outside the tide turned, faithful and sure as it always would. The empire of love and power needed no fanfare. It just was. Solid as a cliff, deep as the sea, and finally, completely at peace. The quarterly review was a performance. The boardroom was packed, the air thick with the scent of ambition and expensive perfume. Evelyn stood before the sleek monitor, her voice calm as she walked them through the data. The greenstone retrofit, born from her first brutal diagnosis, was not just viable, it was outperforming projections by 18%. She pointed to the graphs, the carbon offset numbers, the rising profit margins. She spoke of substrate integrity and cascade failure prevention. She did not mention the night she'd first laid those charts on a different table for one man alone. Alexander sat at the head of the table, listening. He did not smile. He did not nod. His attention was absolute, a silent force amplifying her every word. When she finished, the room was quiet for a beat, then broke into polite, decisive applause. A remarkable salvage operation, Ms. Reed, said an older board member, his tone grudgingly respectful. You turned a liability into a flagship. The liability was always an opportunity, she corrected gently. It just needed a different lens. Alexander adjourned the meeting. As the room cleared, he remained seated, looking over the printed summary she'd provided. Claire appeared at the door. Mr. Thorne, your 1 o'clock with the Singapore investors is waiting in the conference suite. Reschedule it, he said without looking up. Claire's eyes widened a fraction. Sir, they've flown. Reschedule it, Claire. His voice was final. Clear my afternoon. Claire vanished. Evelyn began gathering her materials. Leave them, he said. She looked up. He was watching her now, the boardroom mask gone. In its place was the raw, assessing focus she'd only seen in private. Come with me. He didn't say where. He led her to the private elevator that went to the penthouse level, not his office, but the residential suite above it. She had never been there. The doors opened onto a space of breathtaking, minimalist silence. The entire south wall was glass, overlooking the endless grid of the city. There were no personal touches, no photos, no art that spoke of sentiment. It was an observation deck masquerading as a home. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her. 18%, he said. The numbers speak for themselves. The numbers, he said, turning slowly, are a footnote. You stood in that room full of men who wanted you gone, and you didn't just prove them wrong. You redefined the game. You made them applaud the very thing they tried to bury. He took a step toward her. I have sat through 1,000 presentations. I have never seen anything like that. It was just data. It was a coronation. He stopped in front of her. The afternoon light from the window haloed him, leaving his face in shadow, and it forced me to a conclusion. She waited, her pulse a steady, loud rhythm in her ears. I cannot do this in half measures, he said, his voice low and precise. This experiment, this managed variable, it is a fiction, and I am done with fiction. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, black velvet box. He didn't open it. He simply held it in his palm between them. This is not a ring. It is a key. Evelyn stared at the box, her mind perfectly, terribly clear. It accesses a vault, he continued, his eyes locked on hers. In it, you will find documents, the fully executed dissolution of the non-fraternization clause, a new contract making you a full equity partner in Thorne Industries with a seat on the board, and the deed to a property. A house. Not the one in Westchester, a new one on a cliff in Maine. It has no security system. It has no historical data. It has a library and a view of the ocean and nothing else. He took a breath, the most uncertain gesture she had ever seen from him. The partnership is because I will not build the future without you. The house is because I want to learn how to be somewhere with you that isn't a battlefield or a boardroom. He finally opened the box. Nestled inside was not a jewel, but a simple, matte black key fob. This is not a negotiation, he said. It is an offering, with no terms, no contingencies. You can take the partnership and burn the deed. You can take the house and refuse the partnership. You can take neither. The choice is absolute, and it is yours. He placed the box in her hand and closed her fingers around it. His hand was warm, steady. I have spent my life acquiring things, he whispered. I am trying, for the first time, to give something away, and to ask for something I cannot take. Evelyn looked down at the box in her hand. It was the weight of a new world. A world where the power imbalance was not just leveled, but inverted. He was handing her the controls to his empire and the keys to his solitude. She thought of the spreadsheets and the soil samples, the late nights and the silent car rides, the trap she built and the trust he gave. She thought of the man who owned everything, standing alone in the dark, and the woman who only ever wanted the truth. She looked up at him. His face was stripped bare of all armor. He was just a man waiting for a verdict. Slowly, she closed the velvet box and pocketed it. Then, she reached up and placed her palm against his cheek. His eyes closed at her touch, a shudder running through him. Yes, she said, the word simple and final. To all of it. His eyes opened. The relief in them was so profound it looked like pain. He didn't kiss her. He didn't sweep her into an embrace. He leaned his forehead against hers, just as he had in Austin, and let out a long, slow breath that seemed to come from the core of him. Okay, he breathed, the word a promise, a surrender, a beginning. Outside the window, the city hummed, an empire they now owned together. And far to the north, an empty house on a cliff waited for the only thing Alexander Thorne had ever needed to learn: how to be, simply, with the woman who had never needed saving. The end of the war was not a battle. It was a key in the palm of her hand, and the quiet, shared breath of two people who had finally, after all the collisions, chosen the same ground on which to stand. The morning after was not awkward. It was intensely, deliberately normal. They met in the hotel's business lounge at 6:30 a.m. He was already there, dressed in another simple shirt, reading the Financial Times on a tablet. A second cup of coffee sat across from him, steaming. She sat. He pushed the coffee toward her without looking up. The lead developer from last night, Mark, just emailed. He's drafted a new integration proposal. It's aggressive. It might work. Evelyn sipped the coffee. It was perfect. Did you sleep? He finally looked up. His eyes were clear, focused. The intimacy of the night before was locked away, but not denied. It was present in the lack of pretense between them. Enough, you. Enough. He gave a single nod and returned to his tablet. We meet them at 9. We'll need a unified position. They spent the next 2 hours working side by side at a small table, dissecting Mark's proposal. It was a partnership model, not an acquisition. More autonomy for the AI team tied to aggressive performance milestones. It was risky. It was brilliant. It undoes the original deal structure, Evelyn noted. The original structure was wrong, Alexander said, not looking up from his screen. We fix it. At 8:55, they walked into the AI firm's open plan office together. The mood was different from the day before, cautious, but buzzing with a new energy. Mark stood at a whiteboard, covered in frantic diagrams. Alexander didn't take the head of the table. He took a seat in the middle of the scrum of engineers. Evelyn sat beside him. Your proposal has flaws, Alexander began, and the room tensed. Then he pointed to the board. The revenue-sharing model on line 3 is too conservative. If we're betting on you, we bet big. We adjust it to a 60-40 split in your favor for the first 3 milestones. Mark blinked. That's more than we asked for. I know. It's an incentive to prove my original thesis wrong. Alexander's gaze swept the room. But the oversight clause on page 5 is non-negotiable. You get autonomy. You don't get a black box. Evelyn will be your direct liaison. You answer to her. You have a problem with the corporate side, you take it to her. She has the authority to fix it. All eyes shifted to Evelyn. She felt the weight of the delegation. It was a massive transfer of trust from him through her to them. She gave a small, sure nod. My job is to clear the road so you can build, not to tell you how to drive. The meeting lasted 3 hours. It was a hard, granular negotiation, but it was collaborative. By the end, a new framework was drafted. The rebellion had been channeled into a revolution, sanctioned from the top. On the flight back to New York that evening, Alexander worked. Evelyn reviewed the meeting notes. The silence was comfortable, productive. Halfway through the flight, he closed his laptop with a soft click. The clause, he said, looking out the window at the carpet of clouds below. It's gone. I had Claire file the amendment with legal before we took off. She looked up from her notes. That was fast. I don't delay on strategic decisions. He turned his head to look at her. This is strategic. And what's the strategy? To see if a partnership built on ruthless honesty can survive the introduction of, he paused, searching for the word. Complication, she supplied. Yes, he said. Complication. He reopened his laptop, a clear signal the personal discussion was over for now. The business of building was their common language, their safe ground. The next weeks were a masterclass in discipline tension. At work, nothing changed, yet everything had. A request from her carried the implicit weight of his authority. A suggestion from him was delivered with the expectation of her flawless execution. Their synergy became the stuff of corporate legend, a perfectly calibrated engine. Outside the tower, there was nothing, no dates, no clandestine meetings, no whispered secrets. The choice in Austin had opened a door, and then they had both carefully, methodically begun to build a new room on the other side of it, a room with its own rules. The first test of those rules came on a rainy Thursday. Sophia was in the tower for a foundation meeting and swung by Evelyn's office. "So," Sophia said, plopping into the chair, her eyes bright with curiosity and concern. "You and my brother." Evelyn didn't bother to deny it. Sophia saw too much. "It's managed." Sophia laughed. "Managed? That's the most Alex word I've ever heard. Is that what you want, to be managed?" "It's what we both need right now, to build something that doesn't break what we already have." Sophia's smile softened. "He's different, you know. Since you, the edges are still edges, but they're not aimed at everyone anymore. Sometimes he just looks quiet." She leaned forward. "Just promise me one thing." "And what?" "Don't let him manage the heart out of it. He'll try. It's all he knows." After Sophia left, Evelyn sat for a long time, staring at the rainy skyline. Managed? Was that what they were doing? Or were they building a fortress so strong that nothing, not even feeling, could threaten it? That night, working late again, he came to her office doorway. It was past 10. The floor was empty. "The quarterly review for the energy division is tomorrow," he said. "Your projections on the retrofitted greenstone model will be the centerpiece." "I know, they're readies." He lingered. "You've been quiet today." "I've been working." "I know the difference." She looked up. He was leaning against the frame, his tie loosened, watching her with that unnerving, total focus. Sophia's words echoed in her mind. "Sophia came by," Evelyn said. A flicker of something, annoyance, protectiveness, crossed his face. "And she's observant." He pushed off the doorframe and came into the room, stopping in front of her desk. "This," he said, gesturing between them, "is not a subject for board meetings or sisterly advice. It's a contained variable." "Is that what I am? A variable?" "You are the only constant in a world of variables." He said it plainly, a fact. "And I am learning to run an experiment without controlling every outcome." It was as close to an admission of vulnerability as he would ever get. He reached out, not to touch her, but to straighten a pen on her desk that was already perfectly straight. A minute, controlled gesture of something he couldn't express. "Don't be quiet," he said, his voice low. "I need to hear your thoughts, even the ones about this." Then he turned and left. Evelyn sat in the aftermath of his visit. The rain streaked the windows. He was trying. In his own, tightly controlled, algorithmic way, he was trying to leave a door open between the fortress and the heart. And she, the truth-teller, the architect of secure systems, had to decide if she was brave enough to walk through it, into the unmanaged, unaudited risk of feeling. The suite was silent. He stood across the living area, his back to her, looking out at the glittering Austin skyline. He didn't turn, he was waiting. Evelyn didn't move from the door. The space between them was no longer a professional distance. It was a chasm of everything unsaid and the choice she just made by entering. "You left the door open," she said, her voice quiet in the stillness. "I did." "A test." Finally, he turned. His face was shadowed, his expression unreadable. "No, an invitation. There's a difference." The air was thick, charged. She could feel the weight of the non-fraternization clause in the silence, a legal ghost haunting the plush carpet between them. She walked further into the room, placing her bag on a chair, a deliberate, normal action in a moment that felt anything but. "The Austin team," she began, grasping for the familiar ground of work, "can wait until morning." He cut her off gently, his eyes never leaving her. "This can't." He took a step toward her, then stopped. A man used to commanding continence was now measuring the inches of a hotel room. "For months, you have been the only clear thing in a world of noise. The only person who doesn't want anything from me except the truth." He let out a slow breath. "And I find myself wanting to give you everything except that, because the truth right now is inconvenient. It's a liability. It's a breach of a contract I wrote." She met his gaze. "So rewrite the contract." A faint, almost painful smile touched his lips. "It's not that simple." "It is." She took the final step that closed the distance between them. She was close enough now to see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, to feel the heat radiating from him. "You own the company. You own the paper. The only thing stopping you is you." He didn't reach for her. His hands stayed at his sides, clenched. "What if I'm stopping myself because I don't know how to want something without breaking it? Without owning it so completely, it loses what made me want it in the first place." The confession was raw, stripped of all power. It was the fear at the core of the man who controlled everything. "You don't own me, Alexander," she whispered. "You never could. That's why you want me." A shudder ran through him. The last vestige of control, the final wall, crumbled. He lifted a hand slowly, as if moving through water. His fingertips brushed her cheek, a touch so light it was barely there. "Then what is this?" His voice was rough, her own breath hitched. "A negotiation, where neither side holds all the power." His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "What are the terms?" "No secrets," she said, her own hand coming up to cover his, holding it against her skin. "No games, and the clause is deleted tomorrow." His eyes searched hers, looking for the trap, the angle, finding only the same stark certainty he saw in her reports. "And if I agree?" "Then we see what happens when the most dangerous man I've ever met stops trying to control the one thing he ca." For a long moment, he was perfectly still. Then he leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. Not a kiss, a surrender, a mutual capitulation to an unsolvable equation. "The clause is deleted," he breathed against her skin. That was all. He didn't kiss her then. He simply stood there, forehead to forehead, in the quiet dark of a strange city, the battle finally over. The war of attrition between desire and discipline had ended not with a conquest, but with a treaty. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were clear. The tension was still there, but it had transformed. It was no longer a wire about to snap, but a current harnessed. "Get some sleep," he said, his voice back to its usual low register, but softer at the edges. "We have a company to fix in the morning." He nodded toward a hallway. "Second door on the left is yours." He turned and walked to his own room, closing the door behind him with a soft, final click. Evelyn stood alone in the living room, the ghost of his touch still warm on her cheek. The choice had been made. The line had been crossed. But the crossing had been quiet, a mutual decision, not a chaotic collision. She walked to her assigned room. It was beautifully appointed, empty. She didn't feel dismissed. She felt seen, respected. And terrifyingly, equally responsible for the new, uncharted territory they had just entered. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Down the hall, behind a closed door, was the man who had just rewritten the rules of engagement for the sake of a possibility. The empire of Alexander Thorne had just gained a co-architect, not of its finances, but of its soul. And for the first time, the future felt more daunting and more real than any audit she had ever conducted. He found the sniper. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was a quiet meeting in the back room of a private members club in Midtown, the air thick with the smell of old leather and expensive scotch. The man was a former business associate, a minor player emboldened by Vance's money and grudge. Alexander didn't raise his voice. He laid out evidence, not of the dossier, but of tax fraud, of insider trading, of a hidden mistress in Boca Raton. He presented it as a series of choices, like a menu. The man chose retirement in Boca permanently. Alexander relayed none of this to Evelyn. He simply walked into her office the next morning and said, "It's handled. You won't be photographed again." She believed him. She nodded, and they moved on. The Veterans Transition Initiative launched with Sophia beaming on the front page of the Business Times, a reformed mercenary-turned-scholarship recipient standing proudly beside her. The news cycle pivoted, as Evelyn knew it would. Thorne Industries was now a leader in ethical redress and second-chance capitalism. The stock ticked upward. Life became a new kind of normal. A tense, productive calm. Evelyn's role solidified. She was no longer just a forensic auditor. She was the architect of contingencies, the designer of strategic narratives. Alexander consulted her on everything from market expansions to media profiles. Their partnership was a well-oiled machine, all precision and unspoken understanding. And yet, the unspoken thing grew. It was in the way he'd hand her a cup of coffee, his fingers brushing hers. In the way her presence in a room seemed to deepen his focus, as if she were a lens sharpening his world. It was in the late nights, when the tower was empty save for the two of them, working in companionable silence, the space between their desks humming with something that had nothing to do with business. They never acknowledged it. They disciplined it, banked it like a fire that could either warm the house or burn it down. Then in early spring, the third and final crack appeared. Not from an enemy. From within, it was a minor acquisition, a boutique AI firm in Austin. The due diligence was thorough, the numbers clean. Evelyn reviewed the file and felt nothing. No gut twinge. No hidden pattern. It was, for the first time since she'd started, perfectly fine. She recommended approval. Alexander signed off. 3 weeks after the deal closed, the problem emerged, not in the finances, in the culture. The AI firm's founders, brilliant and volatile, clashed violently with Thorne's staid management. Key engineers began quitting. A flagship project stalled. The problem wasn't on any spreadsheet. It was in the human chemistry, a variable her models couldn't capture. The loss was minimal financially, but it was a blind spot, her blind spot. Alexander called her into his office. He didn't have the file on his desk. He had nothing. "The Austin integration is failing," he said. "I know, I'm reviewing the personnel reports." "You missed it." A simple statement. Not an accusation, a fact. "Yes," she said, "I missed it." He studied her. Why? She thought about it, truly thought. "I was looking for lies, for malice, for greed. This wasn't any of those. This was friction, ego, passion misdirected. I don't have an algorithm for that." He leaned back in his chair. "That's the one thing you can't audit, isn't it? The human flaw that isn't a crime, just a mess." "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment. "I relied on you to see everything. That was my error, not yours." The admission stunned her. Alexander Thorne did not admit error. "What do we do?" she asked. "We fix it." He stood up. "Pack a bag, we're going to Austin." "Oh, we." "You identified a gap in our process. You will help me close it, in person." The Texas sun was a brutal, clarifying force. They didn't go to the corporate office. They went to the brewery where the AI team held its weekly synergy hacks. The place was loud, crowded, smelling of hops and frustration. Alexander, in a simple button-down with the sleeves rolled, looked utterly out of place and completely unconcerned. He didn't make a speech. He bought a round of beers for the long table where the sullen engineers sat. He took a seat at the end. "I hear the new management protocols are idiotic," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. A bearded developer scoffed. "That's one word for it." "Give me a better one." What followed was an hour of blistering, technical, passionate critique. Alexander listened. He asked short, sharp questions. He didn't defend his company. He absorbed the failure. Evelyn watched from the bar, her own beer untouched. She saw the moment the engineers realized the billionaire wasn't there to lecture them, but to learn. She saw the anger turn into a grudging, then eager dialogue. She saw Alexander Thorne, the man who owned everything, become a student of his own mistake. Later, in the rental car driving back to the hotel, the Austin skyline glowing in the rearview mirror, he was silent. Then he said, "You were right. It was a mess, not a conspiracy." "You fixed it," she said, "by listening." "I fixed a symptom. You diagnosed the disease. I built a system that trusts data over people. You tried to warn me with the silence in your report. I didn't listen." He glanced at her. "I'm listening now." They reached the hotel, a modern boutique place. As they walked through the lobby toward the elevators, the strange normality of it hit her. They were two colleagues in a hotel after a business trip. The fiction was so thin it was transparent. The elevator doors closed, sealing them in a silent, mirrored box. He pushed the button for the top floor. Their eyes met in the reflection. The air was suddenly too still, too close. "Evelyn," he said, her name a quiet exhale. She turned to face him, not his reflection. "Alexander." The elevator dinged, the doors sliding open onto an empty hallway. He didn't move. "The contract you signed, the one with the severe terms, it has a non-fraternization clause." "Yes, I know. It's there for a reason." "I know that too." He stepped out of the elevator, holding the door open for her. She followed. The hallway was long, lined with identical dark doors. He stopped at the door to his suite, inserted the key card. The light blinked green. He pushed the door open but blocked the entrance with his body, turning back to her. The light from the suite spilled out, outlining him in gold. "That clause," he said, his voice low, "exists to protect the company from liability, from distraction, from the mess of human friction." She held his gaze, her heart a steady, heavy drum in her chest. "And are you distracted?" A slow, deliberate shake of his head. "No, I have never seen anything more clearly in my life." He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek, not touching. "But this is the one variable I cannot control, the one algorithm I don't have. And it is the only thing that has ever made the victory feel like it might be worth something." His hand fell back to his side. "My suite has 2 bedrooms. Yours is down the hall. The choice is yours. It has always been yours." He turned and walked into the suite, leaving the door open behind him. Evelyn stood in the silent hallway, the hum of the elevator gone, the only sound her own breathing. Before her was an open door. Down the hall was a closed one. He had not drawn a line. He had erased the last one, and in its place he had laid a choice not of surrender but of mutual risk. The ultimate, unauditable variable. She looked at the empty hallway, then at the light spilling from his open door. She took a step forward, then another. She crossed the threshold and closed the door softly behind her. The peace was an illusion. For 2 weeks, there was a brittle calm. The board meetings were subdued. Peter Vance's name was never spoken. Alexander was a controlled storm, moving through his days with a relentless, quiet focus. He didn't summon Evelyn to the house. He didn't ask her to design more traps. Their interactions were confined to the office, crisp, professional, orbiting each other with a new, charged gravity. Then the first crack appeared. It was a small thing. A social media post from Sophia. A photo of her and Evelyn at the foundation, heads bent over a spreadsheet, Sophia laughing. The caption, "My secret weapon. Don't tell my brother she's more fun than he is." It was innocent. Human. The next morning, a dossier appeared on Evelyn's desk, not from Alexander. It was anonymous, left in the center of her blotter. It contained grainy surveillance photos, her leaving her apartment building, her buying coffee from the same cart every morning, her running alone along the East River at dawn. There were no threats, just documentation. A reminder, you are seen. She didn't take it to Alexander. She took a picture of the first page with her phone, deleted the email it came from, and incinerated the physical dossier in the building's secure shredding bin. She said nothing. An attack meant to unsettle her was only effective if it provoked a reaction. But she changed her running route. The second crack was louder. It was a Thursday. Claire's voice, usually so smooth, was strained over the intercom. "Ms. Reed, you're needed in the executive conference room." Immediately. Evelyn walked into a wall of tension. Alexander sat at the head of the long table, his face a mask of impassive stone. Flanking him were the general counsel and the head of investor relations. On the large wall screen was a paused video feed from a financial news network, the Chiron reading, "THORNE Empire Under Scrutiny, Ethics of Private Security TACTICS. "Play it," Alexander said, his voice low. The video showed a woman, her face blurred but her voice clear and trembling with edited emotion. "I'm speaking out because what happened to my husband isn't right. He was just doing contract work. He was taken, detained against his will, threatened by people working for Alexander Thorne. We just want the truth." It was the wife of one of the mercenaries from the Kestrel trap. The news anchor adopted a grave tone. While Thorne Industries denies any knowledge of unlawful detention, sources confirm the use of aggressive, extra-legal private security measures. This raises serious questions about corporate overreach. Alexander muted the feed. The silence was deafening. "She's been paid," the general counsel said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Vance's parting shot. He's weaponizing the cleanup." "The narrative is corrosive," the head of investor relations said, her voice tight. "It undoes the quiet work with Vance's resignation. It paints us as bullies, as tyrants." Alexander's gaze shifted to Evelyn, who stood just inside the door. Opinion. All eyes turned to her. She felt the weight of the room, the expectation. They saw her as the source of the problem, the catalyst for the war that had led to this mess. "Denying it gives it oxygen," she said, her voice calm in the heated room. "A lawsuit against the news outlet for defamation is a years-long distraction. You contain it by controlling the next story." "And what," Alexander asked, his eyes locked on hers, "is the next story?" "A better one." She walked to the table, placed her palms flat on its cool surface. "You don't defend. You pivot. You announce the Thorn Foundation's new Veterans Transition Initiative, a multi-million-dollar program to retrain former special forces for careers in cybersecurity and infrastructure engineering. You frame the past incident as a regrettable misunderstanding during the vetting of a potential security partner, a partner who will now be first in line for your new ethical retraining program. You turn the mercenary into a potential beneficiary. You turn the wife from a victim into a potential advocate. You change the conversation. The room was silent. The investor relations head's eyes widened, then narrowed in calculation. The lawyer began to nod slowly. Alexander's expression did not change, but a flicker ignited deep in his eyes, not warmth, appreciation of a brutal, elegant gambit. "Do it," he said to the room. "Draft the press release, have Sophia front it. It goes live in 3 hours." He stood. "Everyone out. Evelyn stays." The room cleared. The door clicked shut. He remained standing, looking at her across the expanse of polished wood. "You would use compassion as a weapon. I would use narrative as a shield. Compassion is just effective armor." A faint, grim smile touched his lips. Vance miscalculated. He thought he was attacking a vulnerability. He was attacking my chief strategist. He came around the table, stopping a few feet from her. The air between them tightened. "The dossier on your desk, you didn't tell me." So he knew, of course he knew. It was meant to frighten me. I chose not to be frightened. It was meant to isolate you, to make you feel you were alone in this. His voice dropped. "You're not." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, sleek black device, a personal security beacon. "This is linked directly to my detail and a separate, independent team that reports only to me. It has GPS, a panic button, and a non-lethal deterrent charge. You carry it, always." She looked at it, then at him. "Is this an order?" "It's a condition of your continued employment," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. "The war is over, but the snipers are still in the trees. I will not have you targeted because of me." She took the device. It was cool, heavier than it looked. "And what are you going to do about the sniper?" "I'm going to find who paid for the dossier, and I'm going to visit them, personally." His gaze was flat, final. "This ends now, not with a boardroom resignation, with a lesson that sticks." He turned to leave, then paused, his hand on the door handle. He didn't look back. "The initiative you proposed, the veterans program, it's a good idea. A real one, see that it happens." Then he was gone. Evelyn stood alone in the empty conference room, the beacon a cold weight in her hand. He was drawing a new line, not around his empire, but around her. It was not protection she had asked for. It was possession of a different kind. A claiming of responsibility for the target now painted on her back. She looked at the muted screen, still frozen on the worried face of the news anchor. He was right. The war was over. But the battle for the aftermath, for the truth, for the narrative, for the unspoken thing growing between them, had just entered a more dangerous, more intimate phase. The room was an offshore data processing subsidiary called Kestrel Analytics, housed in a bland, mirrored building in Newark. On paper, it handled non-critical, high-volume financial reconciliation. In reality, over the next 3 weeks, it was transformed. Evelyn worked not with it, but with the same quiet, tactical team from the data center. She designed the lure, a flaw in Kestrel's new, quantum-resilient encryption protocol, a flaw visible only to someone who had mapped Thorne's core server layout, the kind of person who'd been on a masked walkthrough. The flaw was a ghost. It would allow a deep data siphon for exactly 47 seconds before collapsing and triggering a silent, localized alarm. The building itself was the trap. Reinforced internal partitions could seal sections like a vault. Non-lethal incapacitant gas lines were installed in the ceiling plenums. Every camera fed to a dedicated hidden control room. Alexander reviewed the plans in his library at night, asking sharp, precise questions. He approved every detail. He did not thank her. The work was its own language. The bait was cast through a chain of whispers. A disgruntled mid-level Kestrel manager with a gambling debt was given a nudge. The flaw was his ticket to a payday. The information would, inevitably, find its way to Peter Vance's remaining loyalists. The night of the expected breach, Evelyn was in the hidden control room, a windowless space smelling of new electronics and cold coffee. Alexander stood beside her, arms crossed, watching a bank of monitors showing the empty, shadowed corridors of Kestrel Analytics. "They'll come between 2 and 4 a.m., she said, her voice low. "Lowest human activity, highest system automation." He said nothing. His presence was a dense, focused silence. At 2:17 a.m., a thermal sensor on the sub-basement fire door turned from cool blue to warm yellow. 2 figures. They bypassed the electronic lock with a sophisticated spoofing device in under 30 seconds. "They're good," one of the tactical team murmured over comms. "Let them in," Alexander said. On the monitors, the 2 figures, clad in black, moved with the eerie confidence of men who had a map. They went straight to the secondary server room, the room containing the flawed protocol unit. They set up a portable data bridge, connected it, and initiated the siphon. A digital timer on Evelyn's screen began counting down from 47 seconds. 40 seconds. They worked quickly, quietly. 30. One of them glanced at a scanner, nodded. 20. The data transfer bar filled smoothly. At 10 seconds, Alexander leaned forward, his hands braced on the console. "Now." Evelyn tapped a key. On the monitors, the heavy interior doors of the server room slid shut with a soft thump. A hiss, barely audible, filled the room as the gas deployed. The 2 figures looked up, startled. One lunged for the door, pounded on it. His movements grew sluggish, then ceased. They slumped to the floor, unconscious. The timer hit 0. The data siphon died. The silent alarm had never needed to sound. "Containment secure," the comms voice confirmed. 2 targets acquired. No external alerts triggered. Alexander straightened. He stared at the screen showing the 2 motionless forms. His expression was not one of victory, but of cold finality. "Bring them to the holding suite. I'll be there in 20 minutes." He turned and left the control room without another word. Evelyn stayed, watching the tactical team enter in gas masks and secure the intruders. The trap had worked perfectly. It was elegant, clean, and utterly ruthless. She felt no thrill, only a profound, hollow clarity. She had built a cage, and 2 men had walked into it, because she had understood the enemy's mind better than they understood it themselves. The holding suite was a secure, Spartan apartment in the basement of the Thorn Tower, used for high-stakes, off-the-books negotiations. When Evelyn entered, Alexander was already there, standing by a one-way mirror. Inside the plain room beyond, the 2 men sat at a metal table. They were no longer masked. They looked ordinary, tired. One had a tattoo peeking from his collar, military. "Mercenaries," Alexander said, without looking at her. "Ex-intelligence. Freelance. They've already given up their cutout. It traces back to a lawyer who traces back to Vance." He turned his head. His eyes were like flint. "It's enough. This ends tonight." "What are you going to do?" What you would do, apply logical pressure. He nodded toward the room. They have families, they have secrets. They will agree to wear a wire. They will arrange a meeting with their handler, and that meeting will be recorded. He finally looked at her. You should go home. This next part is transactional. She understood. He was about to break two men, not with violence, but with the threat of losing everything they valued. It was a darker intimacy than she was meant to witness. She turned to leave. Evelyn. She stopped. The room you built, he said, his voice low. It was perfect. She gave a single nod and walked out. She did not go home. She went to her windowless office. She sat in the dark. The silence was different now. It hummed with the echo of the hissing gas, the soft thump of the ceiling doors. An hour later, her phone lit up. A message from a blocked number. It's done. Vance is resigning from all boards, citing a sudden desire to spend time with his family. The recording will be held in escrow. The war is over. She stared at the words. The war was over. Alexander Thorne had won. Using the trap she designed, the leverage she helped create, the door to her office opened. He stood there, silhouetted by the light from the hall. He'd taken off his jacket. He looked like a man who had just put down a rabid animal, satisfied and vaguely disgusted. You're still here, he said. Yes. He came in, closed the door. The room was plunged into near darkness. He didn't turn on the light. He sat in the chair opposite her desk. For a long moment, they just sat in the dark, two shadows. I should feel something, he said, his voice a quiet rumble in the small space. Triumph, vindication. But you don't. No, I feel tired. He leaned forward, the chair creaking. For 10 years, I've built walls. I've won every fight. Tonight, I crushed the last serious threat to what I've built, and it feels like ash. Evelyn said nothing. She just listened. You asked me once at the house what I felt when you found the truth in Taipei. He paused. I felt relief too, the same as you. For a moment, the world made sense. It was just a broken part. I could fix it. He looked at her, his eyes glinting in the dim light. You can't fix this. Winning just means you have to keep building higher walls. The view doesn't get better. It just gets lonelier. The confession was stark, unvarnished. It was the truth behind the billionaire, behind the power. What do you want, Alexander? She asked, the question leaving her lips before she could stop it. He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, I don't know. I haven't wanted anything in a long time. I've only needed to win, needed to own, needed to control. He stood up slowly. He walked around the desk until he was standing beside her chair, looking down at her. You make me want to know. Her breath caught. The air between them was electric, fraught with all the unsaid things, the months of tension, the shared battles. He lifted a hand, hesitated, then brushed a stray strand of hair from her forehead. His touch was shockingly gentle. You are the most dangerous and the most necessary thing that has ever happened to me, he whispered. And I have no idea what to do with you. He didn't kiss her. He didn't pull her close. He just let his hand fall, his knuckles briefly grazing her cheek. Then he turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the dark, with the ghost of his touch on her skin and the taste of victory like cold metal in her mouth. The war was over, but the quiet, terrifying peace had just begun. The drive was a silent, speeding cut through the night. Alexander worked his phone, voice a clipped, low monotone giving orders. Secure the perimeter. No police. Not yet. Get me a feed. I want names. Evelyn watched the dark trees blur past, her mind shifting gears from architectural schematics to threat assessment. A data center breach was not a financial play. It was raw, physical escalation. an act of war, not corporate espionage. The facility was a monolithic slab of concrete and dark glass set back from a service road, surrounded by a high fence topped with razor wire. Several black SUVs were already there, men in dark tactical gear moving with quiet precision. Not corporate security. Private. Expensive. Alexander's car didn't stop at the gate. It drove straight through onto the sterile tarmac of the loading zone. He was out before it fully stopped. A man with a shaved head and an earpiece met him. "Mr. Thorne, hostage is secure. 2 intruders contained in the primary server hall. They're armed. They've cut the internal cameras. We have audio from the engineer's panic button." "It demands." "None yet, they're just waiting." Alexander's jaw tightened. He turned to Evelyn, who had come to stand beside him. The night air was cold and smelled of damp concrete. "This makes sense to you. A smash and grab on a fortress. No ransom call." Her mind raced, sorting variables. "It's not a theft. It's a demonstration. They're showing you they can get to the heart of your infrastructure. They're waiting because they want you here." "I to see it." He held her gaze for a hard second, then gave a sharp nod to the security lead. "We go in, quietly." "Sir, the risk." "Is mine. You flank. We go through the auxiliary maintenance corridor." They moved. Evelyn followed Alexander and 2 guards through a side door into a narrow, dimly lit service corridor lined with humming pipes. The air was cool, dry. The sound of their footsteps was swallowed by the white noise of the building. They reached a sealed door marked Hall a critical infrastructure. A small, wired glass window offered a sliver of a view. Alexander looked. Evelyn looked over his shoulder. The server hall was a cathedral of blinking blue and green lights, rows of towering black racks. In the center of the main aisle, a young man in a tech polo sat in a chair, his hands bound behind him with zip ties. He was shaking. Standing over him were 2 figures in black wearing ski masks. One held a pistol loosely at his side. The other was tapping at a tablet, not planting explosives, not ripping out drives. "They're accessing the system," Evelyn whispered, the realization cold. "Through a physical terminal," Alexander breathed, his voice grim, "bypassing all network firewalls. They're not here to destroy. They're here to copy." The man with the tablet held it up, showing the screen to the hostage. He said something. The hostage, tears streaking his face, shook his head violently. The man with the pistol raised it, not at the hostage, but at one of the server racks, a specific towering unit. "He's asking for access credentials," Alexander said. "The kid doesn't have them. Only 3 people do. Me, my CTO, and the head of physical infrastructure, who is on a plane over the Atlantic." The gunman's finger tightened on the trigger. He was going to shoot the server, not to destroy data, but to destroy millions of dollars of hardware. A punishment for noncompliance. A statement. Alexander's hand went to the door handle. Evelyn's hand closed over his wrist. Her touch was ice cold. He froze, looking down at her hand, then at her face. "Wait," she breathed, her eyes locked on the scene. "Watch the one with the tablet." The gunman was the threat. But the man with the tablet was the brain. He'd glanced at his watch, twice. He wasn't looking at the hostage or the gunman. He was looking at the server racks, his head making small, calculated turns. He was mapping, memorizing layout under duress. "He doesn't care about the credentials," Evelyn whispered, her mind clicking pieces into place with dizzying speed. "The shooting is the distraction. He's the mission. He's getting a live, walk-through tour of your core layout. The gun is the show. The eyes are the tool." Alexander's eyes widened a fraction. He saw it too. The whole breach was an immersive reconnaissance. a way to see which units were prioritized for defense, the security response times, the panic protocols. "They're learning," he murmured, the fury in his voice banked to a deadly chill. "For next time." On the other side of the glass, the gunman shifted his aim back to the hostage. "Now," Alexander said. He didn't burst in. He opened the door calmly and stepped into the vast, cool space. Evelyn followed, a half step behind. The masked men spun. The gun came up. Alexander ignored the weapon. He looked directly at the man with the tablet. "You can tell Peter Vance," he said, his voice echoing in the hall, "that his audit is over." The man with the tablet flinched. A tiny human tell. The gunman sneered, his voice muffled by the mask. "You're not in a position to give orders, Thorne." "Aren't I?" Alexander took another step forward. He was now between the gun and the hostage. "You've seen what you came to see. You've tested my response. You have your data. Now you have a choice. Leave, or my team outside fills this room and you become a liability Vance will have to permanently delete. He's good at deleting liabilities, isn't he?" A tense silence stretched. The only sound was the hostage's ragged breathing and the omnipresent hum of the servers. The man with the tablet gave an almost imperceptible nod. He pocketed the device. The gunman lowered his weapon just an inch. It was enough. "Walk out the south service door," Alexander said, his tone conversational. "Your car is waiting where you left it. If you ever come near my assets again, I won't call security. I'll call the people you used to work for in Chechnya. I have the numbers." The gunman's posture stiffened. The specific threat landed. He backed up, pulling his partner with him. They melted into the shadows between the server rows. A moment later, the security team flooded in from the opposite entrance, moving to secure the hostage. Alexander didn't watch them. He walked to the server rack that had been targeted. He placed his palm flat against its cool, black metal face. He stood there, head bowed, for a long moment, not in relief, in calculation. Evelyn went to the young engineer, who was being cut free by a guard. She knelt. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, gulping air. "They just made me walk. They kept asking me to point out the AI training clusters." She looked up, meeting Alexander's gaze across the room. Confirmation. It was all reconnaissance. For a future, more precise strike. He left the server and walked toward her. He stopped, looking down at the shaken engineer. "You did well. You're on paid leave for the next month. See a therapist. Send me the bill." His voice was not kind, but it was fair. He then looked at Evelyn. "With me." He led her out of the hall, back into the sterile corridor, away from the noise. He stopped, turning to face her. In the harsh fluorescent light, he looked stripped bare, not of power, but of pretense. "You saw it," he said, "before I did. I was looking at the whole board. You were looking at the threat. That's why you're here." He ran a hand over his face. "Vance is done playing shareholder games. He's targeting operational nerve centers. This won't be the last. Then you need to be smarter than reacting. You need to anticipate the next target." "How?" She leaned back against the cold concrete wall, the adrenaline leaving a hollow, clear-headed space behind. "You feed him a target, one that looks vital, one you can control. You let his people walk into a room you've designed, and you end it." He stared at her. The idea was not defensive. It was aggressively, ruthlessly offensive. A trap. A slow, cold smile touched his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "You're not just a truth-teller, Evelyn. You're a strategist." "You hired me to find cracks," she said, her voice quiet in the empty corridor. "Sometimes you don't patch them. You widen them, and you wait for your enemy to fall in." He was silent, considering her, the woman in the simple dress who had just proposed turning his empire into a weaponized labyrinth. "Start designing the room," he said finally. He turned and began walking down the corridor, his steps echoing. "We have a lot of work to do." The house in Westchester felt different at night when she arrived alone. The dark water was a void beyond the glass, the silence a physical presence. She brought no team, just her tablet, a laser measurer, and the heavy weight of his trust. She started not with the schematics, but with observation. She walked the perimeter in the cold dark, noting the soft glow of existing motion sensors, the blind spots where the old-growth rhododendrons grew thick against the stone foundation. She counted cameras, traced sightlines. The system was expensive, top of the line, and complacent. It was designed to deter corporate spies, not a determined paparazzo with a telephoto lens from the public lake access trail 400 yards away. Inside, she moved room by room. Her own footsteps were the only sound. In his study, she paused. A single book lay open on his desk, a history of Venetian maritime law. A half-empty glass of water sat beside it. The room held the faint, clean scent of him. It felt more intimate than seeing him asleep. She pushed the feeling aside and got to work. For 3 hours, she mapped. She identified the vulnerable points: the utility access tunnel, the old dog door sealed but not reinforced in the kitchen mudroom, the Wi-Fi signal that could be jammed or spoofed. She drafted a plan, not just more technology, but a layered defense. Physical barriers, light pollution for the lake-facing slope, a dedicated air-gapped monitoring system separate from the main house network. At midnight, her phone vibrated. A single letter from a blocked number. She typed back, her fingers cold. Perimeter assessed. Vulnerabilities mapped. Proposal ready by 800. The reply was immediate: "I'm downstairs." She found him not in the grand living room, but in a small, paneled library she hadn't noticed before. A fire burned low. He stood before it, still in his suit pants and a simple black t-shirt, a glass of amber liquid in hand. He looked more like a man and less like a monument. "Report," he said, not turning. She gave it to him the way he liked it. Facts stripped bare. 3 primary physical vulnerabilities, 2 digital. The main threat vector is visual surveillance from the lake trail. Your current system is static. It assumes a threat will announce itself. It needs to be active. Adaptive. He finally glanced at her. An adaptive system implies learning, anticipating. Yes. And who programs the anticipation? The rules are set by the security architect. The AI learns patterns of normalcy. Deviations trigger alerts. He took a slow sip, watching her over the rim of the glass. "You're the architect." It wasn't a question. She nodded. "Set the rules," he said, his voice low. "Make it so no one sees what isn't theirs to see. It will require installation, disruption." "Do it," he gestured with his glass to a chair opposite his. "Sit." She sat. The leather was cool. The fire popped. "Sterling called me after your lunch," he said, his eyes on the flames. "He said you were the most formidable mind he's encountered in a decade. He asked again if you were available." She waited. "I told him you were not for sale at any price." He turned his head, his gaze landing on her like a physical touch. Was that the wrong answer? Her heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. It was the truth. "Is it?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The firelight carved shadows under his cheekbones. "You have a kill switch on my energy division. You're restructuring my sister's life's work. You're now redesigning the walls of my home. Where is the line, Evelyn? At what point does consultant become something else? The air in the room thickened. The question was a door swinging open onto a dark hallway. "The line is where you draw it," she said, her voice steady. "And if I don't want to draw one?" The words hung in the space between them, charged and still. She could feel the heat from the fire, could see the pulse at the base of his throat. This was the collision the contracts and the boardrooms had been circling since the beginning. Before she could find an answer, his phone buzzed violently on the table beside him. He ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. A persistent emergency staccato. He closed his eyes for a brief second, a flicker of profound annoyance, or was it relief, crossing his face. Then he snatched up the phone. "What?" He listened. His expression didn't change, but the air in the room turned to ice. "Where?" A pause. "How many?" Another longer pause. His knuckles were white around the phone. "I'm on my way." He stood, the movement swift and controlled. The moment was gone, shattered. There's been an incident at the Long Island Data Center. A physical breach, armed intrusion. They've taken a hostage, one of the night engineers. He was already moving toward the hall, grabbing a coat from a hook. "My car is outside. You're coming." "Why?" He stopped at the door, looked back at her. In his eyes was no invitation, no softness. Only a stark, absolute necessity. "Because it's my data, my employee, and you're the one who finds the cracks. I need to see this one in real time." He didn't wait for her agreement. He expected it. Evelyn stood, her own pulse now a drumbeat of adrenaline. She left her tablet on the chair, the schematics for his safe house forgotten. She followed him out into the cold night, toward the black sedan idling in the driveway, its engine a quiet growl. The personal line had not just been crossed, it had been obliterated by a crisis. She was no longer auditing his past or fortifying his present. She was being pulled into the fire of his immediate, violent reality. The following Monday felt like walking into a different building. The air in the lobby was the same temperature, the marble floors shone just as brightly, but Evelyn felt the shift. A receptionist's glance held a beat too long. Two junior analysts stopped talking as she passed their cubicles. The silence had a new texture. It was gossamer thin and sticky. She did not go to her office. She went directly to his. Claire was not at her desk. His door was closed. She knocked once, firm. "Come in." He was on the phone. He held up a single finger, his eyes on hers. They were cold, focused. "No," he said into the receiver. "You kill the story. You don't negotiate with it. Use whatever leverage you have. I don't care what it costs." He listened for a 3 count. "Good." He hung up. He placed the phone gently on its cradle. "Sit." She sat. He came around the desk and perched on its edge in front of her, close enough that she could see the fine lines of fatigue at the corners of his eyes. "You've seen it." "I saw a headline." "It's more than a headline. It's a planted seed, with a photograph, you leaving my house in Westchester, time-stamped. The car is visible." The confirmation landed with a dull thud in her gut. "Who?" "A photographer on retainer with a firm owned by a shell company that traces back to Peter Vance. A board member, the most vocal of the old guard. It's a warning shot. To me, to you, to remind us where the real power sits. And your response is to kill the story." "My response is to crush the source," he corrected, his voice a low, controlled rasp. "The story is a symptom. I'm removing the disease." "That will start a war." "It started the moment you walked into that boardroom and called them fools." He leaned forward, his gaze pinning her. "The question is not whether there's a war. The question is whether you're prepared to be in the trenches. Because they aren't coming for your analysis, Evelyn. They're coming for your character, your credibility. They will make it personal. They will make it dirty. She didn't look away. My credibility is based on being right. Your credibility, he said, in their world is based on perception. And right now, they are painting a perception of a young, ambitious woman trading access for influence. It doesn't have to be true. It just has to be plausible. He stood up abruptly and walked to the window. I can pull you out, put you on a deep background project. Let this blow over. Is that what you want? He turned, his silhouette dark against the morning light. What I want is irrelevant. I need to know what you can withstand. The question hung between them. It wasn't about loyalty. It was about endurance. How much mud could she take before she cracked? Pulling me out is what they want, she said, her voice calm in the tense room. It validates their tactic. It shows them a pressure point. They'll use it again. A slow, almost imperceptible nod. So your recommendation is? Ignore it, do nothing publicly. Let the story die from lack of oxygen. You continue your business. I continue mine. We do not react, we do not acknowledge. He watched her, a long, assessing look. That's a very cold strategy. It's the only one that doesn't play their game. He walked back to his desk, sat down. The decision settled over his features, hardening them. No, we don't ignore it, we outflank it. He picked up a pen, tapped it once. You're having lunch today with Michael Sterling. Michael Sterling, the silver-haired, charismatic CEO of Sterling and Price, the rival firm she'd outperformed in her first pitch. A man with his own seat on influential boards, his own grudges against Vance. A public lunch, Alexander continued. At the grill, you will be seen, you will be pleasant, you will discuss the future of sustainable philanthropy. A topic of great interest to Mr. Sterling, who is, not coincidentally, launching his own foundation next month. Evelyn understood instantly. It was a countermove. If the rumor was that she was trading on her connection to Thorne, then she would be seen building her own influence independently with his rival. It reframed her not as a mistress of secrets, but as a sought-after expert. It was brilliant, and it was ruthless. He'll agree to this. He already has. He dislikes Vance more than he dislikes me, and he respects competence. Alexander slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. A bullet point list of talking points, Sterling's pet causes, his vulnerabilities. Be sharp, be charming, not too charming. He's a predator of a different breed. She took the paper. And what will you be doing? He said, leaning back, a cold fire in his eyes. We'll be having a very private, very direct conversation with Peter Vance about the cost of overreach. The grill was all dark wood and hushed power. Evelyn was seated at a prominent booth. Michael Sterling arrived exactly on time, his smile a practiced weapon. Ms. Reed, he said, taking her hand. His grip was firm, dry. A genuine pleasure. Alexander speaks very highly of your incisive mind. He's a generous mentor, she said, her smile matching his in polish, not warmth. The lunch was a 45-minute dance. She steered the conversation to water conservation technology in developing nations, a passion of his. She quoted statistics, referenced successful pilot programs he hadn't heard of. She listened more than she spoke, and when she spoke, it was to ask the question that revealed his own thinking. By the dessert course, he was leaning forward, engaged. The Thorne Foundation is lucky to have you, he said, signaling for the check. But talent like yours deserves a broader platform. My new initiative could use a strategic eye, perhaps a consulting arrangement. The offer was expected. The test was in her response. The Thorn Foundation is my priority, Mr. Sterling, but I'm always open to conversations about meaningful work. A polite, professional deflection, not a rejection, a door left ajar. He smiled, a genuine flicker of respect in his eyes. Understood. We'll talk again. As they stood, he placed a hand lightly on her elbow, a gesture of casual possession for anyone watching. Tell Alexander he should guard you more jealously. The wolves are circling. She extracted her arm with a smooth turn toward the coat check. I'm not something to be guarded, Mr. Sterling. I'm the one who counts the wolves. His laughter followed her out, rich and appreciative. Back at the tower, the air was different again. The glances were now tinged with curiosity, not just judgment. The story of her lunch with Sterling was already a whispered current in the stream of corporate gossip. Claire looked up as Evelyn approached. He's waiting for you, he said to go right in. Alexander was not at his desk. He stood by the sidebar, pouring 2 glasses of sparkling water. He handed one to her. Well, it's done. He made an offer I deferred. He nodded, taking a sip. Good. Sterling will be intrigued. Vance will be furious. The narrative is mudded. He studied her face. You're not upset being used as a pawn. I wasn't a pawn, she said, meeting his gaze. I was a knight. You moved me into a position of strength. There's a difference. A faint, real smile touched his mouth. It was gone in an instant. Vance is on leave of absence from the board for health reasons. The execution was clean, brutal, and the photographer, unemployed, facing a costly lawsuit for trespassing. He set his glass down. The battle is won, not the war. He walked to his desk and picked up a heavy, cream-colored envelope. Your next project. No due diligence. No gut feeling, just a problem. She took it. It was unsealed. Inside were schematics, not for a building or a machine, for a security system, a residential one, his house in Westchester. She looked up, a question in her eyes. The breach was photographic, he said, his voice low and even. It could have been worse. I need the vulnerabilities eliminated. I need it done by someone whose discretion is absolute, someone who understands that some truths are not for spreadsheets. He paused, his gaze unwavering. Can you do that? He wasn't asking if she could hire a security consultant. He was asking if she could protect the only private space he had. He was asking her to step over a line from corporate truth-teller to personal sentinel. She looked at the schematics, then back at him. The trust in the question was absolute and terrifying. Yes, she said. Good. He turned back to the window, dismissing her. Start tonight. She left, the envelope heavy in her hands. The game had changed once more. The lines between professional and personal, between power and protection, had just dissolved into thin air. She was no longer just auditing his empire. She was being asked to fortify his home. The Thorn Foundation occupied a sun-drenched loft in Chelsea, a world away from the austere towers of finance. The air smelled of expensive paint and fair trade coffee. The staff wore bright colors and talked in earnest, overlapping conversations. Sophia Thorn was in her late 30s, with her brother's sharp bone structure softened by warmth and a streak of vivid purple in her dark hair. She greeted Evelyn not in an office, but in a clutter of art supplies and grant proposals spread across a large communal table. So you're Alex's truth-teller, Sophia said, smiling, but her eyes were shrewd, assessing. He sent me a human audit. Should I be flattered or terrified? I'm here to help streamline your operations, Evelyn said, meeting her gaze. To help you do more of what you care about with less friction. Sophia laughed, a bright, genuine sound. Corporate speak, I get it. Okay, human audit, streamline away. But a warning, she leaned forward, her smile not fading but her eyes turning flinty. If your streamlining hurts one of my community partners or makes a single kid wait for a meal, I will call my brother and make his life a living hell. And he'll listen. Understood. It was a different kind of power, not dominance, devotion. Understood. For 3 days, Evelyn immersed herself in the foundation's chaos. The passion was real. The impact was tangible. The financial management was a disaster. Donor funds were commingled. Project budgets were hopeful guesses. Reliance on a few volatile major donors was staggering. On the 4th afternoon, Sophia found her in a small side office, surrounded by spreadsheets. Find the smoking gun yet? Evelyn looked up. No gun, just a slow leak. You're at risk of being unable to fund your core programs within 18 months if your major donor portfolio doesn't expand. Sophia's confident smile faltered just for a second. She pulled up a chair and sat. Explain. For an hour, Evelyn walked her through the numbers, not as an accusation, but as a diagnosis. Sophia listened, her face growing still. When Evelyn finished, Sophia was silent for a long moment, staring at a spreadsheet as if it were a sad letter. I hate this part, Sophia said quietly. The money part, it feels dirty, counting it, worrying over it. The money is the tool, Evelyn said, her voice softer than she used in the tower. If the tool breaks, you can't build anything. Sophia looked at her, really looked at her. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? A shark in a suit. Sophia gestured to Evelyn's simple dress. You're more like a scanner, quiet, taking everything in. She stood up restless. So, what's the fix? Diversification. A structured, multi-year donor pipeline. Professional grant management. It's not sexy, it's work. Sophia sighed, running a hand through her hair. Can you help me set it up? The question was a surrender of a different kind. Yes. Will you tell Alex I'm a hopeless case? I'll tell him his sister has built something remarkable, Evelyn said. And that with the right support, it can last. A genuine, relieved smile broke across Sophia's face. Okay, scanner, let's do it. Evelyn's report to Alexander was sent from the Foundation's loft at 7 p.m. on Friday. It was concise, but it contained a detailed 3-year operational plan. She CC'd Sophia. His reply came 10 minutes later. 2 words, received, proceed, no praise, no criticism, just authorization. She was packing her laptop when Sophia appeared with 2 bottles of local craft beer. You're working late. Drink this. It's a rule here. No one leaves on a Friday without a debrief beer. They sat on the edge of a desk, looking out over the dimming, colorful chaos of the office. Sophia took a long swallow. He trusts you, you know. Evelyn stilled, the bottle cool in her hand. He tolerates my usefulness. Sophia shook her head, a knowing look in her eyes. No, Alex doesn't tolerate. He consumes or he discards. He's keeping you close. He brought you to the house. She said it casually, but her gaze was sharp. It was a business meeting. Alex doesn't have business meetings at the house. He has them in the vault or in rooms that feel like vaults. Sophia turned to face her. You scare the hell out of the old guard, and I think you scare him a little too, but in a way he likes. Evelyn didn't know what to say. The observation was too intimate, too accurate. Just be careful, Sophia said, her tone shifting, losing its levity. My brother is the most brilliant, most isolated man I know. He doesn't know how to want something without needing to own it. And you, she gestured with her beer, you're not a thing to be owned. Sophia pushed off the desk. Enjoy the beer, and thank you for seeing what we do here, not just the numbers. She walked away, leaving Evelyn alone with the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the weight of the warning. Evelyn's phone buzzed on the desk, a notification from her encrypted server. A flagged email sent to a blind address she used for alerts. It was from a sender she didn't recognize. The subject line was blank. The body contained only a link to a private, password-protected gossip blog, the kind that trafficked in blurry photos and boardroom whispers. The preview text showed a headline: Is Thorne's new pit bull more than a professional asset? Sources say late-night meetings raise eyebrows. She didn't click the link. She didn't need to. The board's cooling-off period was over. The attack had just changed shape. She finished the beer, placed the empty bottle neatly in the recycling bin, and powered down her laptop. The game hadn't paused. It had just moved to a darker, dirtier board, and her king had just been put in check, not by a rival, but by a rumor. The office at 8 was the same. Claire with her tablet, the scent of high-end coffee, the silent hum of controlled power. But the door to Alexander's office was closed. Claire's eyes flicked to Evelyn, a flicker of something unreadable in her professional mask. He's in a closed-door meeting with legal and compliance. He asked that you wait. Evelyn went to her windowless office. The Taipei file was gone from her desk. In its place was a new, slim folder. She opened it. It contained a single sheet, a press release draft announcing the strategic realignment and leadership overhaul of the Taipei joint venture. Her findings were the unspoken backbone of every bland corporate phrase. Her name was nowhere. At 8:47, Claire's voice came over the intercom. He'll see you now. Alexander's office smelled of clean, sharp citrus, his cologne, and the faint, acrid scent of espresso. He stood by his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled. 2 empty chairs faced him, the ghosts of the lawyers just departed. Sit. She sat, he didn't. The board is contained, he said, his voice flat, transactional. For now. They've accepted the write-down in exchange for a freeze on any further disruptive audits for the remainder of the quarter. He picked up a pen, tapped it once against the blotter. They called it a cooling-off period. And you agreed. I bought time. He finally looked at her. Your mandate stands, but your methods change. No more lightning strikes. From now on, you work through channels. You bring your concerns to me privately. I will decide when and how to act. It was a leash, a sensible political leash. She nodded, understood. He watched her as if waiting for an argument. When none came, he seemed to relax a fraction. Good, your next project. He slid a manila envelope across the desk. The Philanthropic Foundation, my sister runs it. She's passionate. The books are a mess. Sentiment overrules sense. I need it streamlined, professionalized. It's a sensitive assignment. Evelyn took the envelope. A charity, not a billion-dollar acquisition. It was a demotion wrapped in velvet, a move to sideline her quietly. You think this is a punishment, he said, reading her silence. It's an assignment. A faint, grim smile touched his lips. My sister, Sophia, is the only person on earth I cannot fire, cannot intimidate, and cannot control. If you can bring order to her chaos without causing a civil war, you will have proven a skill more valuable than spotting forged data. He paused. And it will get the board off your scent. They'll think you've been put out to pasture. The logic was sound, cold and sound. 72 hours. She asked, her tone neutral. Take a week, be diplomatic, she's family. At 6:55 the next morning, Claire was not at her desk. Alexander's office door was ajar. Evelyn pushed it open. He was at his desk reading a physical newspaper. The Venice acquisition file was gone. There was no sign of the previous night's tension, no hint of betrayal. The room was just a room again. Sit, he said without looking up. She sat in the chair facing his desk. He finished an article, folded the paper neatly, and set it aside. He looked at her. His eyes were clear, focused. Colin Brewer resigned this morning, cited family health issues. He'll receive a generous severance and a confidential letter of recommendation. Evelyn kept her expression neutral. He had done the emotional thing. He had fired him. A private security firm will monitor his communications and finances for the next 6 months, Alexander continued, his tone conversational. If he contacts his handler, we'll know. If money moves, we'll know. The Venice deal will be canceled this afternoon due to unforeseen regulatory complexities. The market will shrug. He hadn't confronted, he had contained, and he had used her strategy, not his own instinct. You used my advice. I used a logical course of action, he corrected, but there was no heat in it. He opened a drawer and pulled out a new, even thicker file. He slid it across the desk. Your next project, the Taipei joint venture. Due diligence is clean. My gut is quiet. I want you to make sure it should be. She took the file. 72 hours. No. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. This one is real. Take a week. Do it right. And this time, he said, his gaze pinning her, leave the building. Go to Taipei. See it. Smell the air. Talk to the engineers who aren't on the conference calls. The truth isn't always in the data. Sometimes it's in the dirt. It was an order, but it was also an acknowledgement. He was trusting her with more than a kill switch. He was trusting her with his eyes and ears on the other side of the world. Understood. Your flight leaves tonight. Claire has the details. You'll travel alone. Report only to me. He paused. Is there a problem? No, she said, standing. No problem. She turned to leave. Evelyn. She stopped. Last night, he said, his voice dropping, becoming almost quiet. At the window, you didn't ask if I was all right. She turned back. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his own hands clasped on the desk. It wasn't my business, she said. Now he looked up. His eyes were dark, unreadable. It is now. He held her gaze for a 3 count, then gestured to the door with his chin. A clear dismissal. She walked out, the new file in her hands, the weight of his last words settling deep in her chest, colder and heavier than any contract. It was nearly midnight when she finished. The report was concise, 4 pages of cold, bullet-pointed facts. She didn't name the traitor, not yet. She named the method, the digital ID of the server where the soiled data was fabricated, the style markers in the forged letters that matched the work of a specific junior analyst in the mergers department. A trail of breadcrumbs leading to a name which she left for him to find. He would want that. She saved the file to a secure, air-gapped drive, powered down the computer, and sat in the dark, windowless room. The silence was total. She could feel the weight of the building above her, the empire he'd built, now with a silent, ticking bomb placed inside it by someone he trusted. She stood, her muscles stiff, and walked out into the hallway. The floor was dim, lit only by emergency exit signs. She expected it to be empty. He was there. Alexander Thorne stood at the floor-to-ceiling window at the end of the hall, a dark silhouette against the glittering grid of the city. He held a glass of something amber in one hand. He didn't turn. Evelyn stopped. She could walk to the elevator, go home. He hadn't seen her. "Is it done?" His voice was quiet, but it carried down the polished hallway. "Yes." "Bring it here." She walked toward him, the drive a small, cool weight in her palm. She stopped a few feet away, not beside him, but not behind him either. She held it out. He didn't take it. He took a slow drink, his eyes still on the city. "Tell me." "The forgeries originated from a server with administrative privileges in your own data analytics division. The analyst who performed the beautification on the soil reports is a man named Colin Brewer. He's been with you for 8 years. He has no prior flags. He's either being paid by an outside short seller, or he's being directed by someone higher up who stands to gain from the collapse." "Who?" "I can't trace that from the data, only the action. The motive is clear. The beneficiary is." He was silent for a long time. The ice shifted in his glass. "Brewer has 2 children, a mortgage in Westchester. He drives a 5-year-old Audi." Evelyn said nothing. She wasn't sure if he was talking to her or to himself. "He's a tool," Alexander said, finally turning his head to look at her. The city lights etched the sharp lines of his face in shadow and pale blue. "A frightened man, the person who directed him is." "What will you do?" "What do you think I should do?" The question was a trap or a test. She met his gaze. "You should do nothing." A flicker in his eyes, not surprise, interest. "Explain." "If you confront Brewer, you alert the real enemy. You lose the advantage of knowing there's a leak. You let the Venice deal die quietly. You find another reason. You watch Brewer. You see who he talks to, where the money comes from. You use the knowledge. You don't spend it." He turned fully now, leaning back against the glass. He studied her face as if seeing it for the first time. "You're advising a strategy of deception, of patience." "I'm advising a strategy of winning," she said, her voice flat. "Confrontation is emotional, it's satisfaction, it's not strategy." A slow, almost imperceptible nod. He looked back out the window. "Leave the drive on the console table by the elevator. Go home." She didn't move, and the contract. "I saw you signed it." He didn't look at her. "It's binding. Welcome to the Empire, Evelyn." The words should have felt like a victory. They didn't. They felt like a door locking behind her. She walked to the sleek metal table by the elevator bank and placed the drive on it. She pressed the call button. As the doors slid open, his voice came again, quiet in the vast, dark space. 7 a.m., don't be late." She stepped into the elevator and turned. He was just a silhouette again, a man alone against a city of lights, holding a drink he wasn't drinking. The doors closed. The next morning at 6:58, Claire met Evelyn outside the penthouse elevator bank. The space was all frosted glass and quiet, the kind of expensive silence that feels like a held breath. "He's on a call with Singapore," Claire said, her voice professionally neutral. She didn't offer coffee. "He'll be ready for you in the office." Evelyn nodded. She wore another simple dress, charcoal gray. Her portfolio was the same. She looked like she'd slept well. At 7:00 exactly, a soft chime sounded from Claire's desk. She led Evelyn down a short hall, opened a double door of dark wood, and stepped aside. Alexander Thorne's office was not what she expected. It wasn't the cavernous trophy room of glass and ego she'd imagined. It was a library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves of books, real ones with cracked spines. A large, worn desk sat not in the center, but facing a wall of windows, the city laid out like a circuit board below. He stood at the window, phone to his ear, listening. He wore a white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. No tie, no jacket. "No," he said into the phone, his voice low. "The offer stands for 48 hours, not a minute longer." He hung up without a goodbye and turned. He looked at her. Not at her clothes, not at her face, at her presence in the room, as if measuring its disturbance. "Your contract." He gestured to a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper on the corner of his desk. No binder, no tabs. She walked over, picked it up. The terms were, as promised, severe. The confidentiality clauses were draconian. The non-disparagement clause was a lifetime gag order. The compensation figure was a number that made her stomach tight, but not with excitement, with gravity. It was a price tag for her silence, her loyalty, her mind. "It says I report directly to you," she said, reading. "You do." "It says I have the authority to halt any project in your energy division, pending review." "You do." "And that my review is the review." "It is." She looked up. "You're giving me a kill switch to a quarter of your business." "I'm giving you a scalpel," he corrected, coming to stand on the other side of the desk. "A kill switch implies a blunt instrument. I'm not interested in blunt. I'm interested in precision." He placed his hands flat on the desk, leaning forward slightly. "You find the cancer, you cut it out. You don't ask permission. You send me the pathology report. Understood?" "Understood." "Good," he straightened. "Your first project is the Venice acquisition." He didn't wait for her to respond. He walked to a cabinet, pulled out a thick file, and dropped it on the desk with a soft thud. "Due diligence says it's clean. My gut says it's not. I want your gut. And your evidence. You have 72 hours. She didn't reach for the file. "And if my gut is wrong?" "Then you're fired." He said it without malice. A simple fact. And the non-disparagement clause ensures you spend the rest of your life working at a think tank no one reads. He watched her absorb this. She didn't blanch, she didn't protest. She simply gave a single, slow nod. "Clear," she said. "Your office is down the hall. Claire will show you. It is everything you need. Don't leave the building with the file. Don't copy it. Don't discuss it with anyone but me." He paused, his eyes holding hers. "This isn't a test of your skill, Evelyn. I already know you're skilled. This is a test of your discretion, of your ability to hold fire. Can you do that?" The question hung between them. It wasn't about the file. It was about power, his and the portion he was handing to her. "Yes," she said. He held her gaze for a second longer than necessary. Then he gave a curt nod and turned back to the window, dismissing her. 72 hours. Evelyn picked up the file. It was heavy. She picked up her unsigned contract. It was heavier. She followed Claire out. Her new office was small, windowless, and perfect. A desk, a secure computer, a lamp, no distractions, a vault. She sat, placed the contract to one side, and opened the file. She began to read. Hours passed. Claire brought her a sandwich at noon, placed it silently on the desk, and left. Evelyn ate without tasting it. The numbers in the file were perfect. Too perfect. The environmental impact assessments were glowing. The local political approvals were all in order. The projected yields were robust. It was the most beautiful set of documents she'd ever seen. And it was, she realized by 3 p.m., a complete work of fiction. The tell was in the soil analysis reports. The data was too consistent. Natural soil doesn't read like a lab manual. It has outliers, anomalies. This data had been smoothed. Someone had made it pretty. She leaned back, rubbed her eyes. He'd known. His gut had known. He'd given her a forgery to see if she could spot the brushstrokes. At 6 p.m., her office door opened. He stood there, leaning against the frame. He'd taken off his tie completely. He held 2 glasses of water. Well, "It's a fraud," she said, her voice raspy from disuse. "The soil data is manufactured. The approval letters from the Venetian Cultural Ministry use the wrong letterhead for the date they're supposedly issued. It's a very good fraud, but it's a fraud." He didn't look surprised. He stepped in, set 1 glass of water on her desk. "Who?" "I'd need to trace the digital footprints." "But the work was done in-house. Your in-house team. Someone wanted this acquisition to happen very badly." He took a sip of water, his eyes on the pages spread before her. "What's the motive?" "To get you to overpay by 200 million at least. Then, when the real environmental and legal problems surface next year, the value of the asset collapses. The loss sinks your energy pivot. Your stock tumbles. Whoever is shorting it makes a fortune." He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Finish your report. Names, methods, proof. Bring it to me tomorrow morning. Not Claire, me." "Understood." He started to leave, then stopped. "You passed." She looked up. "The test," he said, his hand on the doorframe. "You held the fire." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Evelyn looked at the glass of water he'd left. Condensation beaded on its side. She looked at the unsigned contract. She picked up her pen, and with a hand that did not shake, she signed her name on the line at the bottom. Then she went back to work. The air in the room didn't change. The hum of the HVAC was the same, but the space between them felt charged, like the stillness between lightning and thunder. Alexander didn't look at the chart. He looked at her finger on the paper, then back at her face. "You think you found a blind spot." "I know I did." She tapped the complex equation. "Your team assumed linear decay in the substrate under peak load. The real-world data from similar geologies shows a cascade failure pattern. The model is beautiful, but it's modeling the wrong physics." He leaned over the table, bracing his hands on the polished wood. Not to loom, but to see. He studied her handwriting, the clean lines of her diagrams. It was more elegant than any report his million-dollar analysts had produced. "Where did you get the comparative data?" "Public mineral surveys, academic papers from the last 5 years. It's not classified. It's just not in your team's library." She paused. They were likely told to build a model that justified the investment, not one that questioned it. He straightened. That was the truth, of course. He demanded a go or no-go analysis, and his people, knowing his preference for action, had built a case for go. They'd given him what he wanted, not what he needed. She was giving him what he needed, and she hadn't been asked. "You took a risk," he said. "Coming in here, showing my board they're wrong, showing me I'm wrong." "It wasn't a risk, it was a conclusion." She closed her portfolio. "If you'd rather have a polite fiction than an inconvenient fact, then I've wasted your time. And mine." She moved to leave, a simple, decisive turn. "Sit down." The words were calm, not a command, but a statement of new terms. She stopped, her back to him for a moment. Then she turned, pulled out a chair, and sat. She placed the portfolio on the table in front of her, squared its edges, and waited. He took the seat at the head of the table, the one that had been empty. He didn't speak for a full minute. He let the silence stretch, watching her. She didn't fill it. She didn't look at her hands or out the window. She looked back at him, patient, assessing. He felt seen in a way that was unfamiliar. She wasn't seeing his wealth, his reputation. She was seeing his decision-making process live. "The project is a cornerstone of my 5-year energy pivot," he said finally. "Scrapping it means a write-down, a public relations hit, a loss of momentum." She nodded once. "Yes." "Your solution." "I didn't pitch a solution. I diagnosed a problem." "Then diagnose the solution." For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Not emotion, calculation. "You rebuild the model from the substrate up. You run new core samples at the 3 potential failure points I've marked. It will cost you 4 months and about $2 million in delays and new surveys. And if the new data confirms your theory, then you redesign the anchoring system. It will add 15% to your capital expenditure. But it will prevent a total loss of the asset and, more importantly, a catastrophic failure that could breach 3 environmental regulations and trigger lawsuits that would make the 15% look like a parking ticket." He leaned back in his chair, the leather side. He steepled his fingers, rested them against his lips. He was running the numbers in his head, the timelines, the political fallout on his board, the sheer, staggering liability of the alternative. She had not just found a flaw. She had found the only flaw that could destroy the entire endeavor, and she had handed it to him. "Why?" he asked. "Why what?" "Why walk in here and do this? You could have sold this analysis to a short seller. You could have taken it to a journalist. You could have built your own consulting firm around being the person who caught Alexander Thorne's billion-dollar mistake." He watched her closely. "Instead, you gave it to me, for free." "I didn't give it to you for free," she said. Her voice was flat. "I gave it to you for a price." "Which is?" "The job." He almost smiled, almost. "You want a job after that performance?" "No, I want the job. Head of strategic risk for your new energy division. Full autonomy to audit any project at any stage with direct reporting to you." She said it like she was reading a grocery list. "The team you have now is compromised. They're yes men. You don't need more yes men. You need one person who will only ever say no when it matters." The audacity of it was breathtaking. It wasn't a request. It was a structural proposal for his company. "And if I say no?" She stood, picking up her portfolio. "Then you'll fail, slowly, then all at once. And I'll be across the street, working for whoever finally takes your pieces apart. Good afternoon, Mr. Thorne." She walked to the door. Her heels made no sound on the carpet. "Wait." His voice stopped her with her hand on the handle. He didn't stand. He looked at the cityscape behind her, a kingdom of glass and steel. She was a crack in the foundation of that kingdom, a dangerous one. "My lawyer will draw up a contract," he said, still not looking at her. 6-month trial. The terms will be severe. The expectations will be impossible. The pay will be excessive. Now he turned his head, met her eyes. "You will have access, and you will have my ear. And you will tell me every single thing I'm doing wrong. Is that the job you want?" A long, silent beat. "Yes," she said. "Then be in my office tomorrow at 7. Don't be late." He looked back out the window. He heard the soft click of the door opening, then closing. He sat there for a long time in the empty, silent room. The ghost of her diagram seemed to linger on the table. His phone buzzed. "Claire, the board is asking for a decision on the greenstone pitch." He typed a reply with one thumb, his gaze still distant. "Suspend it, indefinitely. Order new core samples at these coordinates." He attached the 3 locations from memory from one glance at her chart. The reply came fast. "Sir, that's a major delay. The board will." He didn't read the rest. He stood, walked to the window, and put his phone in his pocket. Down on the street, 40 floors below, he saw a figure emerge from the building. A woman in a dark dress carrying a leather portfolio. She didn't look up. She turned and walked down the sidewalk, swallowed by the crowd. Alexander Thorne didn't chase. He observed. And he had just observed the most dangerous person he had ever met walk out of his building. And he had invited her back in. He turned from the window. The room felt colder, emptier. The game had changed. The closing documents were signed in silence. The only sound was the scratch of a fountain pen, then the soft click of its cap. Alexander Thorne didn't look at the man across the table whose company he now owned. He looked at the city below, a grid of light he could turn on or off with a phone call. The victory was absolute, and it tasted like nothing at all. "It's done, Mr. Thorne." His lawyer's voice was quiet, respectful. Alexander stood. He didn't offer a hand. He simply left the room, his head of security falling into step behind him. The elevator down was a smooth, soundless drop. His assistant, Claire, met him in the marble lobby, her tablet held tight. "The board is waiting for the 9 a.m. debrief on the acquisition. Also, the final round of pitches for the Greenstone Renewable Initiative begins in 20 minutes. You're scheduled to observe." He took the tablet, scanned the names. Who's left? 3 firms, Sterling and Price, they're the favorite. Then Wilkins Group. And, she paused, a fraction too long, Verity Consulting. A last-minute substitution. Small new, their file is unconventional. He handed the tablet back. "I'll sit in." The observation room was dark, behind one-way glass. The board members murmured as the first 2 firms presented. Sterling and Price was slick, predictable. Wilkins was safe, uninspired. Alexander's attention drifted to the legal documents in his hand, already bored. Then the door to the presentation room opened. She walked in alone. No entourage, no assistant wheeling a projector. She carried a single, old-fashioned leather portfolio. Her dress was severe, dark, but it wasn't trying to be a power suit. It was just clothes. She didn't look at the board. She looked at the empty chair at the head of the table, his chair. "My name is Evelyn Reed," she said. Her voice was clear, without rehearsal room polish. It didn't ask for permission. "Verity Consulting. You have a problem with your Greenstone data model. The projections are elegant, but they're wrong." A board member cleared his throat. "Ms. Reed, the models were vetted by people who built the original system," she finished, unblinking. "I'm not here to pitch a better dashboard. I'm here to tell you the foundation is cracked. If you proceed, you'll lose 30% of your projected yield within 18 months. I can show you why." She opened her portfolio, not a slideshow. A series of hand-drawn charts, equations in neat, sharp script. She began to talk, not to them, but to the problem. Her language was technical, ruthless, stripping the project down to its faulty core. In the dark, Alexander went still. He leaned forward. She was dismantling a $10 million plan with the calm precision of a surgeon. No hysterics, no salesmanship, just cold, undeniable logic. It was the most compelling thing he'd seen in a year. "So you see," she concluded, laying the final chart flat, "you don't need a new consultant. You need a new premise." The silence in the boardroom was thick. The head of the committee, Gerald, sputtered. "This is highly irregular. We have established protocols, teams of experts." "Who missed this?" Evelyn's gaze was level. "I assume that's why you're looking for outside perspective. Here it is." In the observation room, a board member turned to Alexander. "She's arrogant, dismissive of due process." Alexander didn't answer. He was watching her face. There was no triumph there, no pleasure in proving them wrong. There was only the quiet certainty of being right. a certainty that mirrored his own but born from a different place. His was carved from victory. Hers seemed carved from stone. Gerald tried to regain control. "We'll take your analysis under advisement. You can leave the materials." "No," she said, and began gathering her papers. "The materials are proprietary. The insight is yours. Do with it what you want." She was packing to leave, just like that. Having delivered a bomb, she was simply walking away. Alexander stood up in the dark room. He pressed the intercom button. His voice, flat and carrying, filled the presentation room through the hidden speakers. "Everyone out." The board members froze, looking around. He said it again, slower. "Out now." They stood, confused, gathering briefcases. Evelyn had stopped, her hand on her portfolio. She looked toward the one-way glass, not with fear, but with a sharp, focused curiosity, as if identifying a new variable in the equation. The room emptied, leaving her alone under the lights. Alexander watched her for another 10 seconds through the glass. She didn't fidget. She waited. He left the observation room, walked the 10 steps to the boardroom door, and opened it. She turned. Her eyes met his directly. No demure glance away, no performative respect. It was an assessment, deep, analytical. He was used to being looked at with fear, desire, greed. This was different. This was evaluation. He closed the door behind him. The sound was final. "You just called my board incompetent," he said. His voice was quiet in the empty room. "I called their data model incompetent," she corrected. "Not a challenge, a clarification. It's my model." She didn't flinch. "Then I called your model incompetent." A beat of silence hung between them, heavy and still. He could feel the tension in it, not like a pulled wire, but like the quiet before a storm. He took a single step forward, not to intimidate, but to reduce the space for error, for misunderstanding. "Explain it to me," he said. "The flaw." She didn't move back. She picked up one of her charts, laid it back on the table between them. "It's here, in the load transfer assumption." Her finger touched the paper. His eyes followed the line, then lifted to hers. The collision wasn't loud. It was perfectly, utterly silent,